Bandido's Tux here. So if you like to blow things up in the Division 2, then I have an explosive build for you. This one focuses on the artillery turret, and it's built in a way that's probably going to surprise you on how effective it is. In group legendary gameplay, this thing absolutely obliterates the enemy. There's so much damage in this. It's really hard for even the meta striker build to perform against it. If you really want to be an asset to your team, this is one to run. Lucky for you, I'm going to show you how to make it. Let's go. This is a really great explosive build. I've been using it for several seasons now, at least 6-7 months or something like that. And it's surprisingly one that you don't see out there much because I don't think a lot of people are aware of how effective this build is, because there's some unusual attributes to it that aid in damage beyond the obvious. So right now I'm running in legendary with random group make. There's no coordination going on here, and the team did a really good job. One of these guys is running basically the meta striker build with the striker backpack and St. Elmo's. It's really interesting to see this build go toe-to-toe against that one. So I'll be sure to run through those details with you after I whip through this build. So let me show you what I got.
Entering dog zone.
A quick break to show you the build. This is a 6 skill tier explosive build focused on the artillery turret and status effects. And so on the surface, it might not look really unique, but what is really unique is that this build is precisely configured to majorly debuff the enemy. And with it, you're going to be constantly dealing damage and spreading that damage basically like a plague. And when you do, you're going to activate even more debuffs and get the whole checkpoint under a status effect that is going to be ticking, adding to your damage and decreasing their armor. So this build's not only going to pop them out of cover, but it's going to control the enemies, slow them down, and make them easier to kill for your team. In other words, your team's time to kill is going to go up. You need to run Demolitionist, and that's going to give you 10% more explosive damage, plus the grenade launcher, which I'm actually using. It's a good way to kick off the checkpoint and catch these guys by surprise and put out some really quick damage, especially against rushers and healing station techs. Demolitionist is the only way to get access to the artillery turret right now. So I have a 10% damage mod here and 1 extra mortar and skill haste. And so this thing applies bleed status effect on the affected target. And that's really important for this build. And you'll see why here in a moment. The cooldown is really fast on this thing. We got 10 ammo and it's hitting before buffs. It's round up to 3. It's skill tier 6, as you can see. Really good. And a very nice blast radius and bleed duration of almost 12 seconds, which is insane. Okay, for the other skill, you're quite flexible here, but I don't want to think about it. And so I'm using the Cluster Seeker Mine, just tossing it out as often as I can. But you have lots of options here. But because it's so tedious to aim the artillery turret and because it's so powerful, that's where I want to maintain my focus. But you can also use the Fireflies. These are really effective. These two specifically are really effective for legendary. Definitely recommend either one of those as an alternate. You have the Stinger Hive, which not many people know is an explosive skill. And then, of course, you have your explosive traps. And you'll see me using all of these skills throughout this gameplay, depending on the room. And last but not least, you have your explosive sticky bomb. And in certain rooms where there's only warhounds, I am using the jammer pulse. Okay, let's begin with our explosive pieces. So I'm running 2 pieces of Grupo. These are easier to get than you might think, and I wouldn't really stress out about them being gold rolled because this build is really insanely strong. Just head over to the crafting bench and see what you can do. Skill damage, status effects, skill damage, skill haste, or status effects and skill haste. Any of those combos will work here. And then you're going to want to re-roll a skill tier. That's what's most critical because that's going to give you more artillery rounds, and that's really important. But 2-piece Grupo is going to give you explosive damage. I know you're looking at this and you're saying, hey, Tux, this is really hard to farm. 1, it's really not, but hold that thought for a second. And 2, it doesn't really matter. It's a must-have. So 2-piece Grupo is really important on explosive builds. You're going to have to farm them anyways if you're into explosives. That being said, believe it or not, these are actually not that rare. I get them dropping for me on the regular, even when I'm not farming in a Grupo territory. If you just farm targeted loot as Grupo, you're inevitably going to get something in the realm of what you're looking for. Aim for progress, not perfection, okay? So don't worry about getting 2 pieces of God rolled skill damage and status effects. Just get what you can take at first. Just make sure you can get that core attribute on there. I promise you, the build is gonna work even if you don't have God rolls or if one of your stats are wrong. So my knees is Grupo also, and then this is the second piece, and that's skill tier, skill damage, and more status effects. Yeah, so I'm choosing status effects over skill haste. I do recommend that. Speaking of which, my holster is Golan for status effects. Now this one you don't actually need. You can run an electric now, which is an easier one to farm because Golan usually comes with an armor core. Oh, I do. So I could run this one. I just haven't re-rolled it yet. But this is the easier to farm option. So definitely aim for the electric over Golan. In case you're wondering, it's nice to have both because you might be running the status effect build and have electric on your gloves or whatever. And you might want Golan over here. So that's why I have these options. Hey Bandidos, the community we have built together wouldn't have been possible without you. So as a thank you for supporting my channel, I am bringing you the hookup on member perks, including even more Division 2 content and the celebrated gaming music playlists. If you're not part of Tux's Players Club, now is your chance. All right, so we're putting out bleed, right? So you got a couple of options for your weapons. The capacitor is nice, but you'll notice I'm hardly shooting. That's because you're so darn busy with your skills and your specialization weapon. But you're gonna wanna have the capacitor or some sort of shotgun like the mop in your hand, okay? Now, if you choose to have the mop, you're gonna get the added 10% armor on kill, even if you kill with your mortars. But the reason why you want one of these two weapons in your hand or something similar is because that 12% damage to armor. Damage to armor buffs the bleed damage, and 12% is not a little thing. So if you want a harder bleed, which we do, then you're gonna wanna run damage to armor. Otherwise, the capacitor is giving you 60% more skill damage to your skills if you manage to be able to shoot. You can also run the mop with in sync like I'm doing here, and that's easier to shoot because you only have to put out one shot to activate in sync. It's got a short duration, but there you go. The lefty is also a really good option. You can toss out some grenades if you can manage to land them. But in missions, it's a little easier to land them because you know where the spawns are, so it's a little bit predictable to think ahead and get that grenade out early. All right, let's take a look at the vial mask. Because our primary skill is putting out bleed, it's gonna activate the vial. Vial is activated by status effects. It's got a talent called Toxic Delivery, and Toxic Delivery is a damage debuff over 10 seconds. Now, what a lot of people don't know, even though it's written right there, is that it's based off of 50% of your concussion grenade and is further increased by your status effect attributes. So if you want a strong and a long bleed, you want status effect attributes. If you want a strong and a long vial tick, you also want status effect attributes. So we got a little bit of a synergy thing here. So if we look at our concussion grenade, it's at 2 million. So that's a 1,000,000 debuff over 10 seconds, just from the vial. And then the bleed is ticking at him as well. Okay, taking a look at the chest piece. This is the sacrifice, which is the named Providence that comes with perfect glass cannon. You're playing from cover, so it's not a big deal. Just look for those flanking rushers. Make sure you prioritize them as well as drone operators. But with this type of build, it's not too difficult to do that. It comes with headshot damage. We're ignoring that. I rolled a skill tier. You're gonna want to do that. And then status effects and skill damage and skill haste. So perfect glass cannon. Yeah, an all yellow sacrifice is gonna take time to farm. I wouldn't go out there and try to farm this specifically. The odds of it dropping for you are just gonna be really low. So don't sweat it. Just when you get something like this, be sure to keep it. For now, if you don't have anything like this, just run regular glass cannon and put it on something like a wyvern chest piece for more skill damage. You can also put it on a Golan or an electric, depending on what else you have on your build. You can even run a second piece of China for more skill haste. You can run a Hannah U for more skill haste. You can run a Brazos for more skill haste. So you got lots of options here. Now, you remember when I said the ways to buff the biomask is from status effects as well as explosive damage via the concussion grenade? Well, the other way to buff this is generalized amplified damage, which is what glass cannon is. So all damage you deal is amplified by 30%. So that's buffing your explosive skills. That's buffing your bleed. So the bleed that's ticking out there is also going to be amplified by 30%. And the vial mask, Toxic Delivery, is going to be amplified by 30%. So all of that is going at the same time. And we're not done. You're going to be surprised by the last thing I got to show you here. But of course, there's a downside to this. You're going to be extra glassy. Okay, and the backpack. This one's important. You need to run at least one China Light Industries piece on your build, and that gives you 15% explosive damage, so it's an obvious. It comes with a skill tier, so it's pretty easy to find. I got skill damage, status effects, and more skill haste, but here's the trick: creeping death. So when you apply a status effect, it also applies to all enemies within 8 meters of your target. Cooldown is 15 seconds. So you don't really have to think about this, but it's always activating. But because the checkpoints are really small and many of these missions, you're gonna have the whole room bleeding. And what happens when they bleed? It activates Toxic Delivery. And what happens when they're bleeding with Toxic Delivery? You're applying that amplified damage while you're hitting them with explosions, while you're popping them out of cover with your seeker mines.
Hostile radio intercepted.
And so for the most part, you're debuffing the enemy. Tick, tick, tick. Everybody's ticking in every room all the time. And that damage is a major debuff, decreasing the health pool of the entire mission, making it easier for your allies while controlling the crowd and obliterating them at the same time. And in the end, what you're gonna find is that this really adds up in damage. Look at my damage numbers. That's insane. And to be honest with you, I'm not even really good with the artillery turret. There are players out there that are way better than me. I don't use it enough, mostly because I'm just not a really big fan of the targeting system. I'm constantly pressing the button and nothing comes out of it. It accidentally locks. And so it's just a little slow for my gameplay style, but it's extremely effective. I'm not gonna lie. It's really powerful. So we used to do these speed runs for the average Joe, and we'd show the casual player on how they can speed run without doing extra coordination with their team. Anyways, in those runs at that time, we were running all red striker builds, and usually an Eclipse player would run along with this. But from time to time, one of my buddies, Gambit, would join us with his artillery turret build and take place of that Eclipse protocol guy. And when he did, he was both controlling the crowd, debuffing the enemy, and obliterating enemies at the same time. Not to brag, but with these average Joe speedruns, I would usually come out with the top kills for the team. But when I was running with Gambit and his explosive build, it would be tough competition. And there were several times where he would beat me, but if he wasn't beating me, we were basically tied, and I was running an all red striker blitz build, right? So the basically meta in the game. And so these builds are really strong, and DPS players will have a hard time competing with you. Even if they are killing, you're taking so much of the health pool out of the overall group of enemies. They're not able to put out as much damage because there's not enough damage on the table to deal with, because you've taken that away. You've dealt that damage already. And we had some really interesting philosophical debates about what the team build should look like when somebody with an artillery build like this was on your team. And it had us wondering, like, even for speedrunning, should we even worry about top DPS or max meta DPS builds when we're running with a guy that's running this build? Because the NPCs, you could basically fart in the wind and kill them. So who cares what my DPS was? There was nothing left of the enemy, but maybe a couple of armor bars and a health bar. We could have just ran max damage to health builds for the most part. An effective explosive build is so powerful. The rest of your team can be running junk builds and be killing them as fast as a meta, because again, there's just not much of that NPC. Now, I'm not saying if you're running with an artillery person to go on and put a junk build on, but what I'm saying is that you can look towards more survivability on yourself, more independent survivability, and not have to worry about running like this all red squishy build. There just needs to be enough damage within the group to make sure that that artillery guy doesn't get flanked or overrun by some sort of tank or something like that, and that the gameplay is overall smooth. And so what I'm saying is that's not much. That's not much at all. I mean, you could run an all blue striker build, you can run, you know, Hunter's Fury, Umbra Initiative, whatever you feel like. Now, builds like this will perform differently. It may not be your best option in some content. Like, for example, the zoo is really spread out, and you can find yourself wasting a lot of mortars, missing a lot of shots. And so if you're missing a lot of shots, that means enemies are putting more damage out on your team. You're not clearing checkpoints as fast. You might have to go on cooldown, which on some missions like DUA or Roosevelt Island or whatever, you don't find your turret goes on cooldown very often because you're obliterating the whole checkpoint fast enough and making the most of the ammo that you have.
Son of a bitch, it actually worked.
Anyways, Bandidos, I hope you really enjoyed this build. It's great for Hollywood if you're running that global event. Let me know what you think and your favorite way to run your artillery build. Thank you for hanging out with me today. My name is TuxedoBandido, and this was another episode of The Division 2. If you found this video helpful, subscribe, like, and turn on notifications to ensure you don't miss out on the fantastic experiences waiting for you in The Division 2. And if you like builds like this, check out the recommended build video I have here for you. If you have anything you want to see covered, be sure to let me know in the comments below. And thank you to all the channel members and donors who make everything possible. Tux Nation wouldn't be without you.
Follow me.
I get it.